Here it goes. Okay, I hope you all can see the screen, and we can begin now if there's any no problem. It's a very beautiful lesson today, friends, as we go on with Nicky Gumbel's series, how to respond, how to deal with difficult people that we face in our lives. Okay. Okay, we begin with the scripture portion by Jesus Christ, Matthew 5, verses 38 to 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, hand over your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, how do we respond when we are wronged by another person? How do we feel when insulted or when someone is rude to us? What is our response when our property or possession are stolen or damaged in a burglary or a car wash, or when someone robs us of our time? What should we do or say when we lose money due to someone else's fraud, theft, or negligence? In this section of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus makes the most extraordinary demands of his disciples. He tells them, do not resist an evil person. What does this mean? Does it mean that all the Christians should be pacifists? Does it mean that children should not fight back when they are bullied in the playground? Does it mean that we should never go to the court if we are wrong? Should we give money to everyone who approaches us in the street? Some have taken the words of Jesus absolutely literally. Martin Luther describes the eccentric saint who let the lice nibble at him and refused to kill any of them on account of this text, maintaining that he had to suffer and could not resist evil. Towards the end of his life, Leo Tolstoy, the 19th century novelist, also took this passage absolutely literally. He believed there should not only be no soldiers, but also no police and no magistrate and no law courts. He was also opposed to any form of government. Even today, many Christians, like the Mennonites, opt out of almost all social control for reasons based largely on the Sermon of the Mount. And on the other extreme, there are others who totally reject the passage, like journalist and atheist Christopher Hitchens, who describes Jesus' teaching as deranged, suicidal, and immoral. He is following in the footsteps of the atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who also totally rejected their teaching and was notorious for his claim that God is dead. He contended that Jesus' words were proof of the fact that Christianity was for the weak and cowardly. He regarded it as a slave-like morality where charity, humility, and obedience replaced competition, pride, and autonomy. His search for a Superman perfected in both mental and physical strength and without moral scruples was later taken up and adapted by Adolf Hitler. So just how should this section of the Sermon on the Mount be interpreted? What do these words mean for us today? First, expect to encounter difficult people. Expect to encounter difficult people. Bishop Sandy Miller, who often quotes the devil's Beatitudes, if the devil were to rewrite the Beatitudes, they would probably look something like this. Blessed are those Christians who wait to be asked and expect to be thanked. I can use them. Blessed are the touchy, with a bit of luck, they may stop going to church altogether. They are my missionaries. Blessed are those who are very religious and get on everyone's nerves. They are mine forever. Blessed are the troublemaker. They shall be called my children. Blessed are the gossipers, for they are my secret agents. Blessed are the complainers. I am all ears for them. Blessed are you when you read this and think it is all about other people and not yourself. I've got you. Jesus used the word evil in four varying degrees, of which he gives four examples. First, expect to encounter those who are rude, insulting, and even abusive, resulting in a loss of pride. Jesus says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. According to Jewish rabbinic law, a backhanded slap on the right cheek was twice as insulting as one with the flat of the hand on the left. Even today in Middle East, a slap in the face is regarded as a particularly insulting assault, a gesture of extreme abuse, showing the greatest possible contempt for someone. Jesus himself endured such assaults on more than one occasion. Mark 14:65, John 18:22, John 19 verse 3. Even without being physically hurt, it's still possible for our pride to be injured. Secondly, expect to encounter those who persecute or even prosecute you. Yes, okay. I think this is also the example where Jesus also was slapped, so he knows what we have gone through. Secondly, expect to encounter those who persecute or even prosecute you, resulting in a loss of possessions. As Jesus says, if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, hand over your cloak as well. Losing a tunic, which was the inner garment, would not have been a desperate matter, as even the poorest person would have more than one. He's talking about Jesus's times. A cloak was more valuable and essential. Uh, Most people would have had only one and used it as a robe by day and a blanket by night. Thus, Jesus encourages us not only to give up the inessentials, that is the tunic, without opposition, but also to add that which we consider essential, symbolizing the cloak. Yeah. Ravi Zacharias, a Christian apologist, went to speak at a university in Malaysia. When he was there, he met one member of the staff. Those staff there who was a Christian from a Chinese background. This man had been praying for years that the gospel would be preached in this university. After Ravi had spoken, the man told him about something that had happened to him 4 years earlier when a famous anti Christian lecturer had come to speak at the university. In an auditorium of over 2,000 people, this man was the only Christian. The anti Christian lecturer called him out as a staff member in front of all his students and said, "You're a Christian. I want you to come up on stage." So he came forward and he stood on the stage. The lecturer then slapped him around the face really hard. Then he said, "I'm waiting. What does your Jesus tell you to do?" So a friend did what Jesus told him to do and turned the other cheek. The lecturer slapped him across the head again. Remember, this is in a shame culture. This was the teacher of many of the students, and they were totally shocked. The lecturer then went on to say, "Look at the weakness of Christians. Christianity is founded on weakness." Then he said, "Give me your coat." So the man took off his coat and handed it over. He said, "I am waiting. What does your Jesus tell you to do now?" Standing before an audience of thousands, many of them his students, this man said, "I just want to say to all of you who are my students, I don't want you to be embarrassed because of me. So you may want to close your eyes at this moment." Then he took off his clothes and he gave them to the man, and he walked out, tears pouring down his face, humiliated. The next day, an amazing thing happened. One after another of his students came into his study and said how ashamed they were about what had happened. They asked him to tell them more about Jesus. As a result, he received many letters and was able to talk freely about his faith with hundreds of students. Thirdly, Thirdly, expect to encounter those who take advantage of us, resulting in a loss of time. Jesus says, if someone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. The Romans, as an occupying power, used to compel citizens to carry a baggage for them. If a citizen felt the touch of a Roman spear on his shoulder, He knew he was about to be compelled to carry baggage for a Roman mile, about 1,000 paces, that is less than a mile. It was that is just less than a mile. It was a form of service that was obviously regarded as unreasonable. It was under this custom Simon of Cyrene was compelled to carry Jesus' cross in Matthew 27, verse 32. Jesus taught that we were not to respond to such evil with a vengeful attitude, but to offer to do even more. Fourthly, expect to encounter those who are takers, resulting in the loss of money. Jesus says, give to the one who asks you and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. In the Old Testament, generosity to the poor was taught. If there are poor among you, if anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land, the Lord your God is giving you, the Lord your God is giving you. Do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards him. Rather be open-hearted and freely lend them whatever they need. Give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed towards your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. Yeah. Now, Jesus goes further than this, teaching us to say no to any kind of tight-fisted, penny-pinching attitude, to put the needs of others before our own convenience, and to be willing to suffer financial loss in the service of others who will never pay us back. So how do we respond to Jesus's teaching? At a recent prayer breakfast, Nicky Gumbel says, at a church for poor people working in the city of London, I asked a friend how I could pray for him. He mentioned one or two things about his work situation and then added, oh, and the usual difficult people. I asked him to elaborate, and he said, well, people who don't listen and therefore waste your time. People who are rude, and then he added, money. People who take more than their fair share. It is interesting that those are exactly the categories that Jesus identifies in this passage. Little has changed in 2000 years. How do we respond to these difficult people? Number two, rise about taking revenge. Rise about taking revenge. Robert Kilroy, a number of years ago on a BBC talk program, there was a show called Kilroy, run by Robert Kilroy Silk, who asked the studio audience who had gathered there whether we should take revenge, Here are some of the answers that the audience gave to the question that was asked, whether or not we should take revenge. So one of them said, I cannot allow him to get away with it. Yeah. So one of the audience members saying whether, to the question whether we should take revenge, one of the audience members says, I cannot allow him to get away with it. Most certainly, another one said. A third said, you feel a lot better when you've done it. Yeah. Another said, revenge can do you good. Another said, and if you don't take revenge, you lose your self-respect. And so people just in the audience justified why taking revenge was necessary. Each time one of the participants described the steps they had taken to get revenge, there was a round of applause and cheers from all the others. So everybody cheered whenever revenge was justified. Many of the replies were understandable. One had suffered sexual abuse. Another had lost a limb due to a medical error. Another's husband had an affair with her sister. However, in the audience, there was one West Indian woman who had a radiant expression. When Robert Kilroy Silk asked her, should we forgive? She replied, absolutely. My forgiving released me to get on with my life. You forgive and you get the healing, and that causes you to be a better person. She told the story of how she had been living with a man and expecting his child. One day, her partner went off on holiday and met another woman. Shortly afterwards, he came back to her and announced, I am married. She said it She said it took 3 weeks for this to sink in, and then the rage came. She started to plot. She went into the kitchen and took out a hammer and put it in a plastic bag. I wanted to hammer his head in, she said. I wanted to scar him in a way that he would always be reminded when he looked into the mirror. He would think, this is because of what I did to Mary. Kilroy asked, what stopped you? She replied, I became a Christian. I was told I had to forgive. Mary shone like a beacon of light on that program. She urged the others to forgive and help others in similar situations rather than harboring bitterness. One man said to her, this world's not the way you preach. There are not too many like you around. Kilroy replied and ended the program by saying, perhaps there ought to be more. Perhaps there ought to be more. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is the oldest law. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is the oldest law in the world. Yeah, it is known as the lex talionis, which is essentially the law, which is a tit for tat law. Yeah. Now, this law is definitely present in the Old Testament, Exodus 21, Leviticus 29, and Deuteronomy 19. Yeah. But did you know that this particular law was actually meant down to scale down the violence, to not take revenge in a blind rage? Now, if you remember the story, and this is an addition of mine, I'm just taking a liberty to add a story that came to my mind. In Genesis 34, Simon and Levi, these two brothers who wanted to avenge the rape of their sister Dinah, went into the camp of the opposing tribe, and while they had agreed for marriage, they actually tricked them into saying that yes, we are ready to give our sister away, and you all have to get circumcised. So while the men in that camp also agreed, and the whole community got circumcised, but Simon and Levi were acting deceitfully. They quietly went into the camp after the circumcision was done, and while all the men were lying in pain, they killed all the men. They put to sword everyone over there in the camp. And that is how barbaric the sense of revenge was. So it's not that if you kill one of mine, I will kill another of yours. It was, if you kill one of mine, then I will burn everyone down. I will kill everyone from your side. So to scale that down, this law was meant to restrict violence, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, so that violence, revenge is not taken in a blind way, yeah, killing everyone. So yeah, the second point we see, it was created to guide judges. It was not for private individuals. So even if this law is there, an eye for an eye, tooth for it was meant to help judges make the right decision. It was a guide for the judges. So this was to be an exact correspondence in compensation. It was never intended that individuals should use this law and use it for personal revenge. Yeah. So this was meant for the justice system. Thirdly, it was almost certainly never taken literally to except in the case of capital offenses. Penalties were generally replaced by financial fines and damages. The Jewish law laid down how the damages were to be assessed. This was in many ways similar to our legal system, giving damages for injury, pain, suffering, medical expenses, and loss of wages. Fourthly, this was not the whole picture as far as the Old Testament was concerned. Individuals were taught not to seek revenge and not to bear grudges. Rather, they were taught, love your neighbor as yourself. Do not say, I'll do to them as they have done to me. I'll pay them back for what they did. Indeed, they were peacefully taught, let them offer their cheek to one who would strike them. Lamentations 3:30. Yeah. So from the very beginning, it was God's will that no human being should take revenge. However, by the time of Jesus, this Old Testament has been manipulated and used to justify personal vendettas, vengeance, malice, and hatred. As Jesus is not contradicting the Old Testament, but he is repudiating the misinterpretation and the misapplication of the Old Testament. Jesus is forbidding revenge. Yeah. First, what he's saying is, when we follow Jesus's command, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, do not resist an evil, and whatever he says in Matthew 39 to it's verse 40. Sorry for that. Yeah. So when we look at Jesus's commands about all of this, it is not, we are basically, what this means is that he gives us some concrete instructions. Yeah, just listen to this. So we are not to get even, nor are we to stand by passively. There is nothing passive about any of Jesus's teaching. This may shock you. Listen to this carefully. Yeah, we are to act in a way that changes the dynamic of the encounter. We are not to reply like for like, and not to have a tit for tat attitude. Okay, we are not to adopt the style of the opponent. Yeah, this is not surrender. It is an active engagement to take charge and overcome evil with good. Don't just let him sue you, but take the initiative. Yeah, take the initiative. Hand him the cloak. Turn the tables and go 2 miles. So the oppressor can only force you to go 1 mile, but go to the other. Take the extra mile, one as a volunteer, to show that you are not under his orders. Last of all, the objective is to change the dynamics, and this is where we need courage, which God gives. Yeah, Peter Dobbs. Sorry, I think we got to, yeah. Okay, so basically what we are saying here is that we are not supposed to, John Stott says that, that Jesus, looking at Jesus, that we are not supposed to be a doormat, rather a strong person whose control of themselves and love for other are so powerful that they reject control of and love for themselves are so powerful that they reject absolutely every form of retaliation. So this is of course what Jesus did, and when he was abused and assaulted, he showed incredible strength and extraordinary self-control when he was tortured and crucified. Yeah, Pete Dobbs was a football hooligan, a member of the National Front, and a violent man. After he became a Christian, he spoke about what his life used to be like. Once when I was on my bike, a guy cut me up along the Blackwell Tunnel. I got off my bike, walked around to where he was stuck in traffic, and I put my fist straight through his window. I punched him several times in the face, and then I took his car keys, jumped back on my bike, and rode off with his keys and left him there. Pete also spoke about an incident that occurred more recently after he had become a Christian. I was in the house and I heard a crunch as someone ran over my motorbike. I went out to the car and this little bloke was shaking. Before becoming a Christian, I would have dragged him out of the car and battered him. However, this time I said, "Are you all right, mate? Look, sit down. Don't worry about it." The driver asked whether it was my bike, and I replied, "Well, it's only a bike." "What's a bike? Don't worry about it." Pete Dobbs, he rose above taking revenge. Fourth, sorry, so this is the third point, actually. Third point. Act with an attitude of radical love. The illustration that Jesus gives are all illustrations of the law of love. We have to interpret Jesus's teaching in the context of everything else that Jesus did and said, and also in the context of the rest of the New Testament. Jesus himself, on one occasion, took a whip out of cords and drove out the money changers from the temple. He overturned their tables and ordered them out. John 2:30-16. He stood up to the hypocrisy of the scribes and Pharisees, and on one occasion, he verbally assaulted them. Matthew 23. He also demanded an explanation when struck by an official of the high priest. John 18:23. Likewise, Paul refused to allow the authorities at Philippi to get away with beating him and Silas illegally. Acts 16:37. On other occasions, he appealed to his right as a Roman citizen not to be flogged without a guilty verdict against him. In his teaching, Paul makes a clear distinction between the dealings of the state and personal morality. Paul emphasizes that the government authorities are established by God. In Romans 13, he says, in uh, yeah, in Romans 13, he says, for the one in authority in God is God's servants to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for they do not bear the sword for nothing. They are God's servant, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Paul's teaching does not contradict Jesus's, rather it complements it. Moreover, in his attitude to personal morality, Paul's attitude is exactly like that of his master. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge. Romans 12:17 to 19. The principle of love lies behind both. The state is concerned with the protection of others to stand by and allow murder of violence would be unloving and unchristian. Yeah. So that's what. So basically, the state is allowed to exercise authority to put an end to violence, and we must comply by that authority. And that's a loving and a Christian thing to do. Now, by analogy, if it is right for the state to use force to protect its citizens from internal threats, is it not right to use force for the state to protect them from external threats? Our duty as citizens may also involve us in the use of force to restrain. Okay, sorry, Thomas Aquinas says, just as they use the sword in lawful defense against domestic disturbance when they punish criminals, so they lawfully use the sword of war to protect them from foreign attacks. Our duty as Christians may also involve us in the use of force to restrain evil people. A Christian soldier may need to kill in the course of military action. A Christian police officer may be required to use force in performing his duty. A Christian judge may be required to send people to prison. All of us as Christian citizens may be required to use force to restrain evil and to protect others. If we see a child being attacked and abused, we are not to stand by idly. The principle of love requires us to interfere with force if necessary. There is bound to be a tension within all of us. Yeah. So if we see a child, we want to definitely protect that child from any abuse. There is bound to be a tension with all of us. We are all private individuals with a command from Jesus not to retaliate or to take revenge. Yeah. We are citizens of the state with a duty to prevent crime and to bring wrongdoers to justice. If we are the victims of crime, then we should forgive the criminal, not seek revenge. And yet, we should do all in our power to bring the perpetrator of the crime to justice. It is not easy to hold this tension, but the attitude of love requires that we do so. The same applies to civil wrongs perpetrated against us. It is not wrong to go to court provided that our motive is love and justice, not retaliation or revenge. Likewise, an evil or oppressive employer may need stopping in his tracks, but we must ensure that our motives are right. Similarly, it is not the most loving thing to give money to those who we know we will use it. Sorry, coming back to the statement. Likewise, an evil or oppressive employer may need stopping in his track, but we must ensure that our motives are right. Similarly, it is not the most loving thing to give money to those who we know. We will use it to, we know that he will use it to abuse his own body or in alcohol or drugs. We must ensure that we do not refuse to give simply because we are not prepared for financial loss. The test may be whether we are willing to spare the time to go and buy them food to eat. We must feel the challenge of the words of Jesus and not allow his words to die a death of 1,000 qualifications. We want Jesus's words to be completely convinced and want to qualify Jesus's words so we can obey. We have 1,000 qualifications of Jesus' command. Instead, we must never allow ourselves to be motivated by revenge or malice. Rather, we are to be peaceful, willing, generous, and liberal with our time and money and resources. Jesus calls us to disregard our rights and be passionately concerned for the rights of others. We are called to be totally different from the world around us, to be the salt and light. Once again, Jesus takes the Old Testament law to an even deeper level. He does not supersede the Old Testament requirements. He shows his disciples the true meaning of the law. He calls his disciples to suffering love in the face of evil by his own example. On the cross, he showed how only such an attitude can ultimately triumph over evil. Dietrich Bonhoeffer makes this powerful point. It looked as though evil had triumphed on the cross, but the real victory belonged to Jesus. The cross is the only power in the world which proves that suffering love can avenge and vanquish evil. On 12 June 1972, a photo appeared on the front page of the Washington Post. It was a young girl running towards the camera. Now, this is during the US-Vietnam War, and US had bombed with napalm bombs, the chemical bomb which was put. And this girl was actually, her skin was burnt. So this photograph went on to win the Pulitzer Prize, which is the Oscar award for photographs. And this girl, her name was Kim Phuc, who many years looks like the one on the right hand side. So after 14 months in hospital, speaking about this girl, and 17 operations, she returned home worried. Then her wounds were so ugly that no one would ever want to marry her. Nick Utz, the photo which was taken won the Pulitzer Prize and became an emblem for a nation questioning its reasons for being in Vietnam. Some years later, Kim read the New Testament for the first time in a local library and became a Christian. She said, "It was the fire of the bomb that burned my body. And it was the skill of the doctor that mended my skin, but it took the power of God to heal my heart." As a medical student in 1986, 14 years later, her burns still required daily washing and medication. A fellow Vietnamese student named Toan offered to carry buckets of water up to her apartment, and it wasn't long before he was touched by the loveliness of Kim's spirit. They married in 1992 and emigrated to Canada. In 1996, Kim agreed to speak at a Veterans Day ceremony held in Washington, D.C. This is speaking to the same soldiers who were involved in the attack at Vietnam, basically. She took her place on the rostrum, flanked by US military dignitaries, before a huge crowd of veterans as she stood before a sea of uniform, a sight that brought back terrifying memories of the war. She said, "I have suffered a lot from both physical and emotional pain. Sometimes I thought I could not live, but God saved my life and gave me faith and hope." And then she uttered healing words of grace and forgiveness. "Even if I could talk face to face with the pilot who dropped the bomb, I would tell him we cannot change history, but we should try to do good things for the present and for the future to promote peace." When she had finished her brief but moving remarks, the veterans rose to their feet and broke into an explosion of applause, many of them in tears. It's important to us that she is here," one veteran said. "For her to forgive us personally means something." One man, overcome with emotion, rushed to a patrolman and scribbled out a note asking him to deliver it to Kim. "I am the man you're looking for," basically the pilot who put through the bomb. The note read, intermediaries asked if she was willing to see him, this pilot. "Yes," she said. If they could arrange a meeting away from the crush of people, officials brought the man over to a car. When the reporters cleared away, Kim turned and looked straight into the man's eyes, and then he held out her arm, the same arm she had held out as she ran along the road in agony from her burning skin. She hugged the man and he began to sob. "I am so sorry. I am just so sorry," he said. "It is okay. I forgive," said Kim Phuc, echoing her favorite Bible verse, "Forgive and you will be forgiven." That day, the famous photo of the terrified little Vietnamese girl fleeing the napalm flames was replaced in the National in the national consciousness by the image of a young mother embracing an ex-GI. The words of forgiveness Kim extended that Veterans Day helped heal the conscience of the thousands of veterans gathered there. And as news reports carried the story far and wide, her words and the striking photo helped heal the nation's wound as well. Yeah, this is the sharing of how to respond to difficult people. May God bless us all.